December 1st, 1955. A tired woman on a Montgomery bus is told to give up her seat. She says one word, "No," and a nation begins to turn. When you picture the person who lit that spark, you probably imagine a firebrand, a booming voice, a raised fist. But the people who knew Rosa Parks described her another way: timid, soft-spoken, shy. She once spoke of having the courage of a lion wrapped in radical humility. Years later, she titled her memoir Quiet Strength. So here's the question this whole story is going to chase. How did the quietest person on that bus shake an entire country? Because there is an old line, in a gentle way, you can shake the world. And almost everything you have been taught about power says that cannot possibly be true. We swim in an invisible current, and it has a direction. From the moment we can walk, we are taught that the good life is loud. Speak up. Put yourself out there. Sell it. Susan Cain, the writer behind Quiet, gives this current a name: the Extrovert Ideal. The belief that the perfect person is gregarious, bold, and comfortable in the spotlight. We assume the talkers must be the smart ones. And yet, Cain points out, there is zero correlation between the gift of gab and good ideas. Here's the part that should stop you. Depending on which study you consult, 1/3 to half of Americans are introverts. 1 out of every 2 or 3 people you know. Which means a huge share of us are quietly performing a personality that was never ours and calling the strain normal. To find where this current started, follow one anxious boy. Dale Carnegie grew up poor on a Missouri farm, terrified of speaking, certain he was nobody. Then he discovered something intoxicating. If he learned to work a room, doors flew open. He turned that discovery into an empire of self-improvement, and millions followed him. But Carnegie was only riding a much bigger wave. The historian Warren Sussman noticed that around the turn of the century, America quietly swapped one ideal for another. It shifted from a culture of character to a culture of personality. For generations, the question that mattered had been, are you good? Disciplined, honorable, dutiful? Suddenly the question became, are you magnetic? Fascinating? Stunning? Overnight, in Sussman's phrase, every American was expected to become a performing self. And a performing self is exhausting when the stage was never where you belonged. Once personality became the product, fear became the sales pitch. Open a magazine from that era and watch a brand new anxiety being manufactured page by page. Advertisements warned you about the flaws you couldn't see in yourself. The limp handshake, the awkward pause, the quiet way you might be failing to charm the room. One shaving cream campaign promised to rescue a man from the shame of simply not standing out. And the message never really stopped. You are always being watched. You are always being judged. There is a right way to come across, a winning way, that some lucky people just seem to have. If you don't have it, the ad whispered, you had better learn it, or be left behind. For the naturally quiet, this was not friendly advice. It was a verdict. Now step into a convention hall in Atlanta, refrigerator cold, packed with thousands of people who each paid nearly $900 to be, in the word on the banner, unleashed. On stage stands Tony Robbins, magnetic, generous, a giant of pure energy, and the crowd is dancing, roaring, reaching for the biggest possible version of themselves. Cain went, and she felt the pull of it too, but she also felt something else in that cold hall. This was the extrovert ideal turned into a cathedral. The unspoken sermon was that the life you truly want is waiting on the far side of becoming louder, bigger, more. And a quiet person, standing in that roaring room, is left with one lonely thought. What if the self they are selling back to me is not an upgrade of who I am, but an erasure of it? If Robbins runs the church, Harvard Business School is the training academy, the place that stamps out many of the people who will one day run the world. Cain sat inside its classrooms and found a startling rule. Roughly half of a student's grade rides not on being right, but on how much they speak up, on participating. And students are coached with a chilling little mantra. Even if you believe something only 55%, say it as if you believe it 100%. Nothing here, they are told, is meant to be done alone. Now picture the thoughtful student who wants to be certain before speaking, still turning the problem over while the confident voice beside them has already blurted an answer. In that room, careful looks like weak, and we are quietly training a generation to prize the sound of certainty over the substance of it. This faith has a name, and Cain is the one who coins it: the new groupthink. The conviction that all creativity, all productivity, must flow from a sociable, collaborative place. You can even see it in our buildings. Over the last few decades, the walls came down. Offices threw out the private room for the open floor, the shared table, the endless meeting, all on the belief that if you simply push people together, brilliance will spark in the space between them. It feels progressive. It feels generous. But watch a deep thinker out on that open floor, headphones clamped on, straining to hold one fragile idea together while a phone rings and a conversation drifts past. We built a world optimized for the extrovert and called it optimized for everyone. And then we started to wonder why the great ideas had stopped coming. So does forcing people together actually work? In 1963, a researcher named Marvin Dunnett decided to test it. He took scientists and executives from the company 3M, sharp, capable people, and had them solve problems two different ways: in groups, brainstorming out loud, and alone at their own desks. The result quietly overturns everything the open office believes. The people working alone produced more ideas and better ones than the very same people brainstorming together. Study after study since has agreed. One organizational psychologist put it bluntly: if you have talented people, they should be encouraged to work on their own. There turns out to be exactly one exception. Online, where people contribute in writing without interrupting or performing for one another, groups actually do get better, which tells you the problem was never the collaboration. It was the crowd in the room. For living proof, meet a shy engineer named Steve Wozniak. In 1975, he was sneaking into a garage in Silicon Valley to swap ideas with fellow hobbyists. But the machine that would launch Apple and reshape your entire life, that he built almost entirely alone, early mornings, late nights, at a desk, by himself. And when Wozniak later wrote down his single piece of advice for anyone who wants to invent something world-changing, it was not network or team up or brainstorm. It was two words: work alone. Most inventors, he said, are shy, and they live inside their heads. The most collaborative product of our age was dreamed up by a man who did his finest thinking with the door shut. So if solitude built all that, we are forced into a harder question. Where does a temperament like his even come from? Is quiet a choice, or is it wired in? That question sends us into a laboratory, to a scientist named Jerome Kagan. In 1989, he began watching 500 4-month-old babies, dangling toys, popping balloons, seeing how each tiny nervous system reacted. About a fifth of them cried hard and pumped their arms and legs at all the commotion. Kagan called that group high-reactive. Now, common sense says those loud, fussy babies must grow into bold, loud adults. Common sense is wrong. Kagan followed those children for years, and the high-reactive infants, the ones once overwhelmed by a balloon, became the careful, watchful, quiet teenagers. Their nervous systems simply feel the world more. What looks like shyness on the outside is, on the inside, a brain turned up loud. Introversion, it turns out, is not a bad attitude you can be argued out of. For many people, it runs all the way down to the wiring. But wired in does not mean doomed, and here the story turns beautiful. Scientists describe two kinds of children. Most are dandelions. Hardy, adaptable, able to grow just about anywhere you drop them. But some are orchids. Put an orchid in the wrong soil and it wilts fast. Yet put that same orchid in the right conditions: warmth, attention, patient care, and it does not merely survive. It blooms into something more vivid than any dandelion ever could. The very sensitivity that makes a quiet child fragile in a harsh, loud environment is the exact same sensitivity that lets them flourish extraordinarily in a gentle one. The trait we rush to sand away is really a high-stakes gift. Everything depends not on toughening the orchid up, but on giving it the ground it was built to bloom in. So is temperament simply destiny? Cain's answer is careful, and it matters. No. We are, she says, like rubber bands. At rest, each of us has a natural shape, but we can stretch. The introvert can rise to give the toast. The extrovert can sit still and study for hours. What we cannot do is stretch without limit. Pull a rubber band too far and it snaps back or breaks. As one researcher put it, Bill Gates is never going to be Bill Clinton. no matter how many parties he attends, and Bill Clinton could never be Bill Gates. Nature hands you the band. How you live decides how far you stretch it, which means the goal was never to become somebody else entirely. It was to learn how far your own shape can reach, and then to go there on purpose. If quiet is real, and it can stretch, then history should be crowded with gentle people who moved mountains. It is. Consider Eleanor Roosevelt, painfully shy, easily wounded, the opposite of a natural politician. But that same tender skin made her feel other people's suffering as sharply as if it were her own. In 1939, when a great singer named Marian Anderson was barred from a concert hall because she was black, it was quiet Eleanor who resigned in protest and helped move the performance to the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, where 75,000 people gathered to listen. Her husband was the politician. Eleanor was the conscience. Her sensitivity, the very trait a harder world would call weakness, was the instrument that let her hear an injustice that most powerful people had trained themselves not to notice. Or step onto a stage in 1999, into a room glittering with technology millionaires at the dizzy peak of the dot-com boom. Everyone is euphoric. Everyone is getting rich. And then a plain-spoken man from Omaha rises and gently tells them the whole party is going to end badly. They laugh him off. His name is Warren Buffett, and within a year, he is proven devastatingly right. Buffett's edge was never a louder voice or a faster trade. It was temperament. Once you have ordinary intelligence, he said, what you really need is the temperament to control the urges that get other people into trouble. He calls it living by an inner scorecard, the ability to sit alone, think for yourself, and refuse to be swept up in the roar of the crowd. The quiet man in that loud market wasn't lagging behind. He was seeing further. And this is not only a story about a handful of famous introverts. Travel to a high school in Cupertino, California, where many students come from Asian families, and the air itself feels different. Here, the loudest kid is not the automatic winner. Quiet gets read as focus. Listening gets read as respect. Persistence, done softly, without fanfare, is what earns admiration. Cain calls this soft power, strength that never needs to announce itself. It is a living reminder that the extrovert ideal is not some law of nature. It is one culture's fashion, barely a century old. Other places and other times have looked at the very same quiet child and seen not a problem to be fixed, but a depth to be trusted. And no single life proves the force of soft power more completely than one shy, stubborn young lawyer in South Africa. As a young man, Mohandas Gandhi was so shy he could barely speak. Handed a short statement to read aloud at a meeting, he froze on the spot, and someone else had to read it for him. By every measure of the extrovert ideal, he was a failure. But Gandhi took his quiet and forged it into a method. He called it satyagraha, firmness in pursuit of truth, a way of resisting without shouting, standing firm without striking, refusing without hatred. He did not overpower the British Empire. He outstilled it. Late in life, he wrote a line that could be the motto of every quiet person who ever changed something. My shyness has been in reality, my shield and buckler. It allowed me to grow. It helped me discern the truth. The trait he was told to overcome was the exact trait that made him unstoppable. In a gentle way, he shook the world. But let's be honest, knowing that quiet is powerful does not make the loud world disappear. Sometimes an introvert simply has to stand up and deliver. So how do they do it without breaking? Meet Professor Brian Little, a spellbinding lecturer who bounds across the stage, cracks jokes, dazzles a hall of students, and who is, by his own testing, one of the most extreme introverts you could ever meet. His secret is an idea he named free trait theory. We are each born with a temperament, yes, but we can act out of character, genuinely, convincingly, in the service of what he calls our core personal projects, the things and the people we love enough to stretch for. Little performs like an extrovert, not because he is one, but because he loves his students and his subject that much. Personality is not a prison. For what matters most, you can become, for a while, someone you are not. There is a catch, and it may be the most practical wisdom in the entire book. You can only act out of character for so long before it begins to cost you. Little's answer is what he calls a restorative niche. the place you slip away to in order to become yourself again. For him, it was long walks beside a quiet river, and when he was trapped at a conference, ducking into a bathroom stall just to escape the small talk between sessions. It sounds funny until you learn the danger of skipping it. Little once pushed himself to perform far too long, with far too little recovery, and it nearly killed him. A bout of pneumonia his doctors tied to the sheer strain of it. The lesson lands like a hand on your shoulder. Stretch hard for what you love. Then go home to yourself. The quiet is not where you hide from your life. It is where you get it back. This quietly changes how we love each other too. Picture a couple. One an extrovert, one an introvert. He comes home lit up, wanting to go out, to pack the evening with people. She comes home drained, wanting the couch, the calm, and him. Each one secretly suspects the other is a little broken. He thinks she is rejecting the world. She thinks he cannot bear to just sit still with her. But neither of them is failing at love. They are simply running on different batteries. One that charges in the crowd, one that charges in the quiet. So many fights that feel like a clash of hearts are really only a clash of wiring. And the moment you can finally say out loud, "This is how I recharge," not "This is how I love you less," a whole silent argument can finally end. And it changes how we raise our children. Mark Twain once told a parable about a man who died and asked to meet the greatest general who ever lived. He was shown, instead, an ordinary cobbler. That man, he protested, was no general. "Ah," came the reply, "but he would have been the greatest of them all, if only he had ever been given the chance." How many great, quiet minds never get their chance, because a well-meaning adult decided the shy child was the broken one? Kane's plea to every parent and teacher is not to toughen these children up, but to truly see them. The boy reading alone at recess may not be lonely. The girl who won't raise her hand may understand the answer best. Push too hard, and you teach a child that who they are is a mistake. Give them the right ground, and you may be raising the next quiet soul who changes everything. Now here is where you should trust Susan Cain more, not less, precisely because of what she refuses to oversell. She admits, plainly, that there is no clean, all-purpose definition of introvert and extrovert, that the two are not tidy boxes but a wide spectrum, with plenty of ambiverts sitting in the middle. That, in Jung's own words, there is no such thing as a pure introvert or a pure extrovert. She tells her readers, more than once, to take what fits and leave the rest. And she is careful never to simply flip the old prejudice on its head. Extroversion, she writes, is a wonderful, appealing way to be. Her argument was never that quiet is better than loud. It is that we forgot quiet holds any power at all, and built an entire world as if only half of human nature counted. She is not selling you a shiny new label. She is handing back a missing half. So what do you actually do with all of this? Cain leaves us not with a program, but with an image. The secret to life, she writes, is to put yourself in the right lighting. For some people, that light is a Broadway spotlight. For others, it is a single lamp glowing over a quiet desk. Neither one is better. They're just different rooms. And the whole long tragedy of the extrovert ideal is that it kept insisting there was only ever one. Love is essential, she reminds us. Gregariousness is optional. You do not have to become louder to matter. You have to find your own light and then go stand in it. Because the shy woman on the bus, the boy who built the future alone, the lawyer too timid to speak, every one of them proved the same quiet truth. In a gentle way, you can shake the world. So find your lighting, and then go shake it.